a more general thing, because I'm really talking about the fact that when we are talking about the functioning of the market, it is that the market really, as it were, resides atop of the whole subterranean set of power relations. Okay? And that is something that is not taken into account. I'm not talking about the power relations in terms of the capitalism, which when that is in the account we are talking about, let's say, using profit inflation, etc. But you know, that other kinds of power relations, because if it was only those power relations, then as I said, the very long movement on would be difficult to explain. So the terrain of my discourse is quite different from when I was talking about the oil dollar standard. About the other question, yeah, you know, I mean, the point is really very simple. I'm not going into the relations and the mechanism and complexity. But I must equal it, as you know. So this can happen in two ways. When the capitalist sector invests, in that case, there must be an amount of savings that is generated in order to permit this investment, or you know, it generates the consequence of the investment. There's some voluntary savings. There's some post savings of the workers located inside, and there is a certain amount of gratis transfer through taxation that's taking place from the colony, which is also, as it were, a saving as far as the capitalist country is concerned. The greater this gratis transfer, the less is the necessity for profit inflation, and therefore the more other transfers that, as it were, the stability of money wages is not disrupted. Okay? So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying.
You said that you know, that you could have significant growth of industry alongside stagnation of agriculture, and in the colonial framework, it is at the high for a very long period of time, that is really in crisis. Over the last 2 decades, even in the Indian economic context, we have seen that it has been possible to sustain significant industrial growth alongside near stagnating agriculture or a very slow rate of agriculture is happening. But how does this sort of political framework you have, does it sort of come back to again, or is that sustainability there in terms of manufacturing? You know, you create a conventional class, income class, is completely segregated from a much larger population, is getting left out of this.
Okay, no, I mean, you know, I'd like to draw a distinction between two quite separate logical issues. One is that you take any economy. Industry can grow independent of its own agriculture because it may, for instance, get hold of agricultural materials from elsewhere, through international trade. In other words, a detachment between two sectors of an economy which is open is actually possible. There's no reason why Indian industry should buy goods from Indian agriculture. It can buy goods from Argentinian or whatever, African or whatever other agriculture. So a dealing, a detachment in the two sectors within an economy that's open is one issue. It's perfectly possible for the industrial sector to grow at very high rates, agriculture to be stagnant, but on the other hand, you have a situation where the industry is as it were getting hold of its raw materials and so on from elsewhere or all its markets. But quite another is when we are actually looking at the world as a whole, which is a closed economy. The world as a whole is a closed economy. There, if you have two separate spheres, one that is broadly defined as primary commodity production, agriculture, the other is broadly defined as industry, then a situation in which industry grows, all its requirements are met from the stagnant agriculture, must entail impoverishment inside that stagnant agricultural sector. And carried on with this implicitly, so he actually thought that there would be a harmony between the two sectors, and industrial growth would ultimately have to be agriculture-led. Now that is certainly necessary in an ideal arrangement. If we are talking about how should the Indian economy be planned, I would say, yes, of course, agriculture must grow, and in order to provide raw materials for industry. But on the other hand, we are talking about the reality of history, in which agriculture does not grow, nonetheless, industry grew at the world level by sucking up resources from agriculture, which is stagnant. And if necessarily entail some absolute impoverishment for the population.
And Rohit, I was in 1991 that. This is a question to Prabhat Patnaik. Since you said that this is the 40 years of your work and not just restricted to the particular talk, I would actually like to ask you a question combining the two books that you've written, I mean the accumulation and stability and the value of money. There are two questions on that. The first one is that in the accumulation and stability, you talk about three stabilities that capitalism has to overcome. Three instabilities. One is price, the other is output, and the third, which is social instability, which is quite important, and that's where you put the role of the colonies or the third world in terms of providing the stability. Given today's situation with globalization, where actually, and what is happening across the world, in particular the first world, where you see a social instability happening in terms of different movements, and in particular the fact that the real wages are actually declining in the United States and other first world countries, how do you see your work in that context, in particular since the United States is not really in the same situation as Britain at one time was? So how would you see that? And also this literature is basically a critique of the convergence thesis. And what you see today is also at the same time that the rate of growth in the so-called third world, certain countries in the third world, there's actually a diffusion of capital happening, manufacturing sector growing. So is it actually a negation of this alternate growth framework that we are actually moving towards convergence, or is it in terms of a dead end that capitalism is hitting, not just in terms of this particular crisis, but
That's a really question. What you say, that I don't know how to respond to it. Yes, actually when I was talking about that time, I was talking about things at that time, I was talking about two different worlds without the diffusion. In fact, one of the basic propositions about the book is take for granted the fact that diffusion is limited. Okay. Now, you are absolutely right that under this theory of globalization, there has been substantial diffusion of activity. But the condition of the diffusion of activity is the fact that wages are low in third world countries. Wages are real wages. So real wages are low because of the existence of extraordinarily high levels of unemployment and labor reserves in third world countries. So if you like, think of a Bayesian model at the world level. What's happening is there are substantial unemployment labor reserves located particularly in Asian countries or elsewhere, China, India, etc., Indonesia, and that, as it were, gives you real wages set at a certain low level. Because of which now American workers feel the competition of these real wages, which is why their wages can't rise if productivity rises, if anything will fall in their wages. They will say that over the last 30 years there has been an absolute decline in terms of real wages in American workers. But if that is the case, then taking the world as a whole, there is an under-consumption business here. Again, an under-consumption problem. The surplus is rising much faster than a few bubbles, fundamentally, because this intervention other things is no longer possible. So you have basically bubbles generated investment. Now you can have periodic bubbles that actually give rise to substantial investment boosts and so on, but on the other hand, with the collapse of the bubbles is a crisis and this superimposed on top of basically under consumption situation. I think many people like what to do anyway, many American economists have been talking about it. The fact that the real wages in America have been stagnant is the reason underlying the crisis, because if the real wages are stagnant, then basically the bubbles that occasionally give you growth, but with the collapse of the bubbles, then you want to go back in a situation of crisis. But the point I would say, I'm not accepting conversion because the condition for diffusion is the fact that real wages must remain low. And real wages will remain low precisely because of the fact that labor reserves are there. If labor is reserves in third world got exhausted, then you would have a kind of diffusion, because then real wages would start rising. That's not what is happening. Okay. So no matter how much industry moves to India, or how much activities move from China to India and so on, real wages here would continue to remain low, because that is the basis for the movement of these activities. And I should say, on the question of American versus Indian competition from the Chinese real wages, China's